Today I'm here with Bob Kulhan. He's the owner, founder of Business Improv. And I met Bob, we just compared notes, January of 2018. We were at this really cool company. They were doing leadership. And then Bob talked about he does improv for business. Now, it's the first time I actually saw that connection. And what attracted me is that I was attracted to improv. I actually had taken some lessons in improv, 8 weeks with a company here in Fort Worth, primarily to up my facilitation skills, but I never thought you could use it in business application. So we've talked a few times, trying to find a connection. And I think this is the moment. I think the pandemic has forced companies to look for different ways to engage their people. And so what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes with my friend Bob, talk about a little bit about your business, where you came from, how it started. Then we'll get into some how-to applications because I've got some questions I'd like to ask you. So Bob, how did you actually start doing this kind of work?
Rex, first, thanks for having me. It's great
Yeah,
chatting
you're
with
welcome.
you. So, my undergrad degree is appropriately enough a BS in business. And so I was actually good at business marketing specifically. And at about the time that it was time for me to shift into some pretty solid careers, because I won a Bank of America award for creative marketing in the early 1990s. That's when I started really diving into improvisation and loved the art of improv. Loved it. This was in Chicago, and I loved everything about it. Cut to 5 years later when I left business and was focusing solely on improvisation. I was broke and about to lose my Chicago condo, and I had the opportunity to create the first improv program anywhere in the entire world in any business school that focused solely on linking improvisation to business. And so the
Wow.
fall of 1999, I collaborated to create that program for the Duke University Fuqua School of Business, and it blew up. The students loved it. The faculty were like, "What are you doing? Teach us." And so I taught faculty how to be more conversational, more agile in the way that they were presenting, have focus and presence, change their
Yep.
presenting
Yep.
style possibly. And then that moved over into exec ed, and that moved over into businesses. And so I created a business and LLC'd myself in 2001 as a CYA, and cut to 2021, and here we are.
Well, so a lot of people have different understandings of what improv is. I certainly did. When I first went, I thought, well, how do you be spontaneously funny? But that's not what it's about. So to get rid of some of the misconceptions, what's the biggest misconception when people talk about you or they introduce you at their dinner parties? What's the biggest misconception about what improv is all about?
You hit it right on the head. Comedy. It's really twofold, though. The first is comedy because that's how most people are associated with improvisation,
Right.
whether it's an improv or sketch comedy house or great TV shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's introduced to us as a comedic format, so the association directly goes to comedy. And my base in Chicago, I mean, I rose to the highest stages possible in the hardest city to do it, and that was comedy, comedy, comedy. So I definitely am rooted in that capacity. That's how most people know it. The other way most people know it, though, is well, this is what happens when the excrement hits the oscillator. And this is scramble. It's scramble. That's what improv
Yeah, yeah,
is.
yeah.
There's no
Right.
way to prepare for it. There's no way to train for it. And that's 100% wrong. It's not. Comedy is the outcome of that specific type of improvisation. And what you're doing in real time surely is rooted in improv, yet most people don't think about how to get better at that. And as you mentioned, in the last year, we've all been forced into change in some capacity. So the way that we define improv in business improv is on three core capacities, three core capabilities, which
Okay.
is reacting, adapting, and communicating. Reacting is presence and focus. Adapting is if you're doing it within parameters, like a strategy, for example, a
Mm.
sales conversation. You're reacting and adapting, and then subroot to both of these is communicating. Especially if you're leading change, you have to communicate. You have to take people with you. So really, if you focus on those three core competencies, reacting, adapting, communicating, the question isn't, do you need to do that? That's the answer. The question is, how do you get better at it? because
Right.
we are forced into change. We're forced into the unknown. We're forced into unpredictability right now. And so that level of agility, which is different than adaptability, needs to be put in place to be adaptable within a strategy, within a sales conversation, within using a different medium to
Hmm.
communicate with each other. So all of the skill set that's related to producing the outcome of comedy then becomes very important as it relates to building relationships, connecting with each other, leading through change.
Well, and what I saw from a lot of the leaders I was dealing with is they were reacting, but it was reacting, reacting, and reacting. So there wasn't kind of the flexibility. I guess that's fight or flight. So there's a way, because what I experienced when I was going through the training is stress and fear um, of looking foolish. How does that apply to leaders in these kinds of situations?
This is a great question because really it's fight, flight, or freeze as
Okay.
well, right?
All right.
That new
Yeah.
one
Hmm.
kind of made
Right.
its way through, and I think a lot of leaders last year started with the freeze. I think you've heard me say like when this hit everybody, it was kind of like the ice bucket challenge. You weren't even expecting it. Somebody just came out with like a 15-gallon bucket of ice and just dumped
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
on you.
Yeah.
What happened? I don't know. Just be
Totally.
still. Just
Yeah.
be still. Let's wait
Right.
till June. It'll go away in June, whatever this is. So that turned into the scramble leadership that you mentioned. That it could be fighting, it could be flight, who knows. However, there's a lot
Right.
of leaders like, what do we need to do right now to persevere? What do we need to do right now just to survive? Let's go to the core
Yeah.
elements of
Right.
this. And now we're getting to a point that the writing is on the wall. This is a way that we are going to have to communicate and collaborate going forward.
Mm.
This is a way that we're going to have to build relationships going forward. So a lot of leaders are now thinking, what can we do with this? So as that relates to, the improvisational mindset, it is that agility. It is improvisation at its core is a communication and collaboration based art form. And that transcends medium. You should be able to do this on the phone. You should be able to do it on site
Mm.
with each other. You should be able to do it through this medium. And I say that because business improv has always been virtual for 21 years. New York, Chicago, LA, North Carolina. Those are our satellite offices. We have to communicate. We have to collaborate. We have to build cohesion. We have to build trust. This relates to morale. This
Mm.
relates to mindset, well-being, of getting people in that same space that we know we're not alone. Even though we're not next to each other, we can actually form those same type of bonds with each other because what we
Wow.
focus on are people skills, human connection with each other. And all of that relates directly to where we are right now.
Well, and you can now. This is a side note for most people. Chicago was kind of the mothership of improv comedy. What was the hardest lesson for you in kind of those early days? And what's the thing that is most translatable for the leaders that you're coaching?
Early on in my improv career, I was fortunate to be taught by a somewhat common name now that most people will recognize, Tina Fey.
Oh,
Tina Fey was
sure.
my
Wow.
coach.
I didn't
Yeah,
know that. That's cool.
yeah. Tina
Yeah.
and Amy Poehler was my coach as well. So this kind of dates me. It makes me though an old Chicago vampire when it
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
to improv. I was taught by the people who created this art form. My mentor created the Second City Training Center. So I'm an old vampire. Now, Tina though, what she told me is this came after I think a couple of shows where I was essentially steamrolling. I was a ball hog, I was just funny, funny.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
look at me, everybody!
Yeah.
And she gave me the explicit direction: do not be clever, do not be creative, do not be funny.
Wow.
Be present and in the moment at a very high level, and then do whatever you can to make everybody else look good. And so
Wow.
coming from her, I mean, even at that time in 95 or so in Chicago, she was already so well respected and rightly so. I mean, she's just brilliant on stage. So getting that direction from her became a central focus for me, that it goes outward, it goes to the team, it goes to the
Wow.
people. And that's the style of leadership I have. And that to me is so relevant right now where people are looking for ways to get connected with each other. So improvisation isn't about how clever you are or how funny you are or how creative you are. It's how
Mm.
present you are in the moment and how you can connect with other people. And ultimately, how can you make them look good? How can you support other people? How can you get their backs so that they unconditionally know that you support them, not in bad decisions, just, as people, as employees. And in doing so, that turns around and comes back to you. And it creates intrinsic motivation because it's a basic human desire to be understood. It's a basic human desire
Now,
that gets us.
so for me, thinking about managers, the pressure that they have, um, the pressure to look like you're in charge or you're knowledgeable. What you're saying sounds like a tremendous relief that you don't have to have all the answers, that the answers may be, I mean, improv is kind of what comes out of the group. So, how does a manager translate to still function as kind of the boss or whatever, but uh, let go a little bit? What does present really mean? Because that term gets thrown out a lot, but what does it feel like? What does it look like to be present?
Okay, so there's a couple of great questions that you asked right here. So I'm going to start with the presence aspect.
Okay.
Presence is how you hold the room. Presence is how you're maintaining composure. And it could be anywhere from spine and back to your countenance, your
Oh,
facial
wow.
expression.
Okay.
Presence is how you're holding your voice as well, how you're sharing your voice. And so, as it relates to something like working through this medium, and Rex, listen to the language I'm using. This is a medium, just like the phone is a medium.
Hmm.
Just like being on site, it's a different way. And so a lot of people think plug and play. Whatever worked on site is going to work perfectly here. It doesn't, because we're not respecting the
Okay.
difference here.
Yep.
And so presence here then is getting comfortable with this, and as that relates to leadership, rank and status are different things. Your rank is where you are in your company, and status is something that's given you by other people or taken away from you by other people, either to your face or behind your back. And so when you start looking at the differences there, then we don't always have to flex our rank to keep our status as leaders. And in a time where there's so much unknown, I mean, just looking at how globally the whole world has to change, let alone industry by industry and company by company and communicating here, I find that the most enlightened leaders are vulnerable enough to say, I don't have all the answers here. I
Yep.
promise you we will get the answers and I will lead us through this. Right now, what we need are smart people talking. What's working? What's not working? What do you see from your unique lens? Our target, our mission is still the same. Our alignment, our agenda is still the same. Right now, let's unleash possibility and potential from just perspective. You, as an intelligent, trusted person in this organization, tell me what you see that I cannot see right now.
So, Bob, I'm going to get some free advice. And there's two primary phases that I'm brought into for projects. One is in the beginning stage, the forming stage. And then I'm brought in most of the time on the storming phase, or when I like to say when they need some adult supervision. So let's take the start phase and imagine you've got a new crew. I don't know what you call the improv crews, maybe.
Yeah, crew, team, ensemble.
Okay, ensemble. So now you're with contractors, architects, subs, and we're at the very initial. What is your primary goal and how do you get the room comfortable for going off of just a training, a drill and kill kind of workshop?
So primary for me starts with really foundational blocks.
Okay.
Everything for me starts with foundation because if you don't have a foundation, how do you erect architecture for success?
Hmm.
What are you building on? So for me, it all goes down to those basic levels. And so looking at improvisation at its core being a communication and collaboration based art form, those are two of the first blocks we put into place. How to communicate with each other, how to collaborate with each other. The next thing is how to postpone judgment of each other.
Hmm.
And this is an important one. This does not mean abandon judgment. It means deliberately, strategically create the skill set in which we can postpone judgment, push it off to another time, so that we can create these environments that are psychologically safe, that people are not afraid to talk with each other, not afraid to have the wrong idea, the wrong answer at a strategic period of time. So we're talking about strategic failure. What does that arena look like? And then drawing a line and then separating the gold from the fool's gold, the gold from the weeds. Like what are the great nuggets? This is where the judgment, the critical thinking hat comes back on. And it's not being critical of each other. We're just looking at ideas, because your great idea would not be your great idea probably without 4 or 5 other people having bad ideas around you,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that psychological safety becomes super important, because as a foundational block, again, communication, collaboration, the ability to postpone judgment strategically, what this does then is create intrinsic motivation that's related to wanting to come to me with ideas, wanting to come to each other with ideas, knowing that you could say anything, of course, respectfully, to each other without fear of looking foolish. Any of those barriers to communication, collaboration, creativity, adaptability, change that we all have, knowing how to remove those strategically become foundational to the way that we put teams together in the forming stage.
That's nice. And one of the things that was a misconception of mine is that improv is kind of free for all and the genius of the person, pulling the strings, but there are rules and there's kind of process. And so learning those, I think, have helped me tremendously. So now I'm going to give you another scenario. You're walking into a team that has been struggling. There's conflict on the team. And now you need to begin to at least get it moving in an open dialogue. They've already made their judgments about everybody. And so now you've got to kind of reframe the whole thing. What's a starting point to do that with a group? You're coming in,
Yes.
they don't want to be there. They'd rather be adversaries than try to go where they know you want to take them.
Yes. So I've actually done this for a number of organizations that, are on the smaller side, small businesses, medium businesses, big pharma, really high level executives. So this is right inside my wheelhouse here. So the way that we approach this first is to create a common understanding. And sometimes that common understanding is just on me as an outsider or this philosophy, because as mentioned, improvisation not only has strange connotations for a lot of people, it's negative to a lot of people, especially if you focus on that other part of like, it's what happens when everything else goes wrong type of mindset. It also creates a lot of apprehension in people, fear, anxiety in people.
Right.
Because they think we're going to have to do comedy or we're going to have to get in front of each other and perform. Whereas that's not what we focus on, at least our approach in business improv. We teach people how to ride a bike.
Right.
So we create this vulnerability of everybody learning this specific skill set in real time. So you create these core blocks for them now that take away the job aspect and turn it more into the team aspect. Go back to the fundamentals, those same blocks that I would do with a team forming, and put them in place in the storming stage. So now we all know what we're building on. And then it has to be an iterative process, because what you're talking about doing is changing behavior and ultimately quite possibly changing culture as well. And that's not a one and done. That's got to be something it's not the first time riding a bicycle in which you get to enjoy the bike. It's the 50th time. It's the 500th time when it turns into unconscious competence. And so you start building to the point that it's conscious competence and unconscious competence. And you just toggle between those 2 points as we continue to get comfortable with these techniques, grow together, and create an environment in which now status is leveled. We're sharing with each other.
This reminds me of kind of active listening with finesse, with a human side. So much of active listening is kind of this rote, let me repeat what I said back to you type of thing. This is so much more human, natural, just kind of ebb and flow. That's part of my attraction to it. I want to bring you into the current context. You and I are now communicating through a different medium, through a lens and a camera, and we're looking at little boxes. What I love about live facilitated workshops is I can roam the room, play off the body language and the energy, and all that's gone. So I'm oftentimes feel much less present. How do you do that in this environment? How do you make a meeting feel like it's human in this virtual environment?
All right, here's a free one for you and all of your listeners.
Got it.
It's not the same. Stop
Okay.
looking at it as the same. So
Thank
this
you.
is my challenge I have with a lot of people. That I wrote an article for Forbes a few months ago that compared working from home in a pandemic to vegan cheese. And I'm just going to compare the same
Vegan.
thing here. That when it was vegan cheese, a lot of people were just turned off by it because of the branding by that point. And
Yeah.
then it's like, it's just like cheese. That would be like the argument. Whereas people who like animal-based cheese are like, it's not. It doesn't taste like it, doesn't smell like it, doesn't feel
Right.
like it. There's nothing about vegan cheese that is cheese to me. And so a lot of people were just turned off by it. Then when you rebranded it into plant-based cheese, people were like, oh, it's plant-based. It's not real cheese. It's not supposed to be. It's plant-based.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the mind then shifts and they're like, it's actually not bad. And, the herbs they infused it with, the garlic, whatever it is that
Yeah.
made the
Yeah.
cheese taste better, the vegan cheese, now plant-based cheese, it's marketed a little bit differently and our brains twisted. And that's what we need to do here as well. Understand that we're not on site. So the chemistry is not going to be built the same way. So you have to, again, respect the medium and look to build chemistry this way. And I will stress that the techniques, we started doing distance influence techniques 7 years ago or so when
Oh,
people were
wow.
out, how do I
Yeah.
influence each other on the phone?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
do I
Yeah.
influence conference calls and sales calls? What do we need to do?
Makes sense. Yeah.
And there's ways to build chemistry when we can't even see each other on the phone. So our first deliveries here were in 2017. 4 years ago, we were working through these mediums, this technology. And so you just have to approach it from, well, what actually works here? Where are people on their terms? Mentally, physically, emotionally, even. And then how do we create this common space? Because if you can create this common space together, whether it's mindset or energy, which is what we focus on an awful lot in the business improv programs, manipulating energy to get to the same space, then it turns kinetic. And once it turns kinetic,
I like
ooh,
that.
we don't even have to work at it anymore. Now we're in that zone. And there's where the chemistry comes from.
Where does somebody start working in a virtual environment to begin improving their skill set or their ability to manage a team with an improv skill, exercise, or technique? Where can somebody at least test it out?
The first thing is, let's go back to the vulnerable leader, right? Because
Good. I
again,
like
I'll,
that.
I'll link this to an enlightened leader,
Yeah.
somebody who's like, I don't have to have all the answers right
Right.
now. What I need to do is communicate and let you know that I will find the right answers and I will guide us through this storm. And I'll be the first person in the battle. I'll be the last one out of the battle. I will be here the whole time throughout it. So with that, just start with trying. Just try.
Okay.
Keep it simple. You know that adage, what's the best way to eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time, right? So we get overwhelmed with, oh, I got all this change. How am I going to change everything? How am I
Yeah.
going to get everybody? You don't need to do it today. Do
Right.
one thing today, one small thing today. And so as it relates to improv techniques, it
Hmm.
could just be talking to people about it. I'm thinking about trying these improv techniques. I'm
Right.
thinking about trying, I got online, I looked up yesand.com. I looked at the improv encyclopedia. I found this game. Tweak the game, change it. What makes sense for, and I'll go first person, Rex, you on your terms, your voice, your authenticity, because it has to be authentic. If it's not authentic, then the probability of people following you is going to be very, very challenged. So maybe you test it with somebody in your stay-at-home office with you. You're like, I'm just gonna talk to you about yes and, okay? What's the difference between yes and yes but? Kind of classic. So the first time you link the mind to the mouth, there's some there's there's I didn't want to say it that way. I don't even know what just came out of my mouth. So you get some feedback from your child, from your significant other, your partner, your spouse, whoever it might be, a trusted ally in your work environment. I'm just going to link the mind and mouth. You tell me what you understand about the simple concept of yes and. You tell me what you don't understand. That way, now I have a little positioning around how I could frame it better when talking with the larger group. And then maybe just put a little exercise in, whether it's an energy manipulation exercise, whether it's a postponement of judgment exercise, whether it's a yes and type of exercise, just one small thing. And keep in mind, like what I'm talking about, I said it before, it's worth repeating. You don't have to do this all in one day. It doesn't have to
Good.
even be 1 week. Just a little bit. Just to, work on it. Take some notes. What worked? What didn't work? What can you learn from it?
Well, and so for where we're headed with this, every now and then kind of there's a new meme in terms of awareness, like Brene Brown, vulnerability, and now it's becoming just standard table stakes that people are understanding that what is it about improv that is kind of current and relevant in this shift in the pandemic, the virtual environment, coming back to the office? I keep hearing you say vulnerability and presence seems to be a common thread. Uh, why is this, in your mind, an essential skill?
Going back to how we define improv, reacting, adapting, and communicating,
Okay, good.
there's so much unknown, right? And
Right.
there's so much volatility around that unknown. Go to VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That
Yeah.
Army term, it's so relevant right now. And there's a plus C from Colonel Joe LaBeouf that goes with that, and that's change. Because everybody is forced into change right now, whether you
Mm.
like it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can either lead the change, you just go with the change, or you get drugged behind the change. No matter what, we are changing.
Wow.
And this style of communication is part of that change. Will it be 100%? I hope not. I like to think we're going back to 2019, 2018. It's not going to
I
be.
don't think so. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not. There's
Right.
nobody, there's no leader, no
Right.
thought leader
Nobody.
who thinks that it's going
Yeah.
to do that. So now we're forced into this. How are we dealing with this? How are our sales teams dealing with this?
Mm.
How are we building relationships, not just internally, externally? How are we developing more clients? How are we building trust inside those clients when we can't shake hands right now and I can't buy you lunch or
Right.
have a beer with you? Or what about those social engagements that just serendipity, we bump into each other at the soda machine and we get into a casual conversation with each other, and that leads to a little business and not much. It's just more casual, like, the kids, what about this? Or show up 10 minutes early to a meeting just by accident and
Yeah.
get to talk with each other. All of that's gone. So the way that we need to build these relationships has to adapt to this situation.
Yeah.
So as it relates to vulnerability, I would also push it off to curiosity.
Oh, I like
how
that. I
how to
like
do
that.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And developing, especially as leaders think about what they're doing internally for sales development, client development, new relationships, you have to be curious to approach this from different angles, and improvisation thrives in that.
That is, yeah, to me, that's the thing that resonates the most is the curiosity. For me, being in the moment is being curious. Wonder what's going to happen. Wonder where it's going. Wonder why that. All of those things help me from getting too clever. That's my big takeaway is the curious mindset. Now, you do consulting, you do
Yeah.
training, you have an online course. So just kind of give me an outline of the areas that you're working in right now, the services that you're providing. And then, of course, how does someone find you?
Thank you. Thank you. So I think it's worth noting that we started the development to the online programs that we have, the virtual programs, in 2010. So 11
Yep.
years ago, we were
Wow.
in the creation and
Wow.
transitioning from on-site engagements to virtual. We started delivering virtually in 2017. So the way that we approach things and the depth and breadth we have in business improv is wildly different than having to create it in a global pandemic with an economic turmoil and political unrest and
Right.
social and civil unrest and everything that's been going on in the last 365 days. So what we are being tapped for quite often starts with that sales. Is it sales of building relationships, connecting with each other? What happens if you only have like 5 minutes with somebody? How do you really make your message on point? I don't know how well we stress or mention that the way that we link improvisation to business is through behavioral psychology and cognitive psychology and social psychology,
Okay.
behavioral economics,
Right.
decision making models.
Yeah.
So
Nudges. Yeah.
yeah,
These,
exactly.
these
Yeah.
little relational nudges.
Yeah, exactly. And then
Yeah.
in real time, if you're present and in the moment and agile, adaptable in real time, you can nudge one direction or another direction. So as that
Love it.
relates to sales, it's pitching, it's presenting, it is that presence. It's what about the redundant messages? Are you on
Yeah.
point if you have to deliver the same message over and over and over again? As it relates to teams, it is creating nimble teams, agile teams, teams based in cohesion and trust with each other, creativity, innovation, getting to the difference between the two of them, let alone how do you actually put those in place and drive to the unknown. It's leadership development. A
Mm.
virtual leader is different than an on-site leader. I think most people are beginning to sink their teeth in it.
Yeah.
21
Yeah.
years being a virtual leader. Let's talk about conflict. Let's talk about conflict management. Let's talk about difficult conversations
Wow.
with each other.
I like that.
And then ultimately culture.
Yeah.
How do you create a virtual culture so that this is sustainable? And there is a way for people who are onboarding come in like, this is how I need to communicate, collaborate. This is how I need to behave inside this organization. This is the mindset. These are the rituals, the beliefs, the practices, the accountability practices. That structure needs to be put into place in order to make that change sustainable ultimately, as well as something that you can replicate with other people coming in, different divisions, etc.
These last few minutes have been absolute gold for me, taking away, kind of the curiosity side is a tangible way to think of vulnerability. Taking the ability, the difference between a virtual leader and, I mean, those are great. Now you also have online training, as you said, you started it in 2017. I've been on your online course, really practical, short hits of practical input. I love it. And so for me, somebody's obviously going to say, okay, so how do we learn more about it? So how do they find you, and what's kind of the first place they can start by testing you out or trying some of your products?
Yes. So, all right. How do they find me? Business Improv.
Okay.
Businessimprov.com. That's the
Nice.
easiest way to find me, or find me on LinkedIn as well. Of course, we're very active there. As far as showing you some of the depth and breadth, it's not just in the types of programs that we have and the delivery on site versus virtual. That async program that you mentioned, improvisational communication, it's for
Yep.
personal and professional development in communication, collaboration, creativity, change, dealing with conflict, and creating culture as well around that. And for
Mm.
anybody who's out there who can either not get to an improv class right now, or is like, I don't know that I'm comfortable in an improv class, you buy it, you own it, Rex, you just go at your own pace. So
Right.
you're playing off of me on the screen. I give you a homework assignment. It's got worksheets that you can download, and you walk out with an action plan in your words how to use these tools and techniques. So you can just go through that pace. The book, Getting to Yes and, is a Stanford University Press book. So that's the textbook for this. It's rooted in the behavioral sciences. It's rooted in the practical experience. This is how you use these tools and techniques. That little like how to eat an elephant, it's in there like try this next step. Now
Mm.
look for this pushback. This is how
Yeah.
you deal with this pushback. Let's look at it from different angles. And of course, as you mentioned, I do coaching. So I do one-on-one, I do small group, and the company does large group trainings as well. And we go everything from one-offs to ongoing to create culture, that sustainability, that pull through.
Nice. Well, having it on an app too, your teaching platform makes it real easy just to pop it and try, go into one of the classes, and they're about what, 3 to 5 minutes a piece, each one. So I like that. So for me, when I think about this and I think about us coming out of the pandemic, there's definitely some new skills that are going to differentiate leaders, managers, salespeople from the past, and being able to, we call it dance in the moment. That's kind of the consulting word we use. So, there are the scripted people, there are the people who can kind of create an interaction, but those who can be spontaneous, present, curious, dance in the moment. I think those are going to be some of the differentiating skills. So, if you were going to leave everybody with maybe one thought or question that you think that you hear a lot, or something you hear from a lot of people that you want to pass on, what would that be?
I'll leave with a couple of questions, I
Okay.
guess. If you were going to pause right now and take a moment to reflect, how important are people to you?
Hmm.
Revenue growth, profitability. You put a number on that. 0, nobody, it doesn't matter. 10 is, no, they're very important to me. Put a number on that. The next point to reflection is this: does culture eat strategy for lunch?
All the
Now,
time.
the question then for both of those two is, if people are important, that's an assumption, and if culture eats strategy for lunch, how much time do you put into that a week?
So, Bob, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for allowing me to introduce you to my clients and my network. And I wish you the best, and appreciate coming on. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Rex. I appreciate it. And be safe, everyone.
Yep. Take care.